Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Valentine's Day edition of the Chatham Finance Committee, February 14, 2023. Pursuant to Governor Baker's July 16, 2022 signing of an act relative to extending certain COVID-19 measures adopted during the state of emergency, including the extension of his March 12, 2020 order suspending certain provisions of the open meeting law, this meeting of the Chatham Finance Committee is being conducted in person and via remote participation. Every effort will be made to ensure that the public can adequately access the proceedings as provided for in the order. A reminder that persons who would like to listen to this meeting while in progress may do so by calling 508-945-4410, 945-4410, entering conference ID 384-384-565, #. Or one may join the meeting via Microsoft Teams through the link in the posted agenda. Despite our best efforts, we may not be able to provide for real-time access, and we will post a record of this meeting on the town's website as soon as possible. In accordance with town policy, the public can speak to any issue or business item on the agenda during the meeting when recognized by me, the chair. We are going to start with a roll call. Norma Avalar. Here. Tommy Doan. Is not. Barbara Madison.
Here.
John Papalardo. Here. Joanne Sprague.
Here.
Andy Young. Here. Kristen Andres.
Here.
Tracy Shields. And the chair is present. All right, we are going to continue our review of the town manager's proposed FY24 budget, focusing today on the public safety department. We have representatives of the police department and the fire department here with us today. Combined, the two public safety budgets, not including emergency management, animal control, things of that nature, but the two primary divisions account for about $7.7 million in proposed annual spending. And a lot of activity on the town's behalf and keeping us all safe and sound. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Chief Mike Anderson of the Police Department to give us a bit of a overview of his requested budget, if we could, please. Jill, is there anything you'd like to say in advance of any of this, or? Okay, great, thank you. All right, Chief, over to you, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the board. Let me just bring up some slides. So before I start, I just want to say thank you. This will be my first budget proposal in front of this board, so thank you for your time in hearing from me. It's always important to know how many calls for service we get each year, what we do with our time and how we spend our time. If you look at our calls for service from 2021 as compared to 2022, the numbers might be a little bit less this year. And that's only because when I took over in July, I just re-examined the way that we cataloged and logged our calls for service. There were a couple of categories that I felt really were not calls for service that were previously logged in the past. For example, would be like a building check, or community policing contact. Those are really proactive things that we do. You know, we perform over 12,000 building checks or property checks a year. Those are not in response to an alarm. That's just something that the police department does while we're on patrol, whether it's day shift, eve shift, or the overnight shift. And I just didn't feel that it was an appropriate to list it as a call for a service. So if you compare the numbers from this year, 2022, to last year, you might see a decrease in this year's numbers. I just wanted to make sure we're clear with that. So the number we come up with is roughly 6,095 calls for service. Couple of things to look at. People say that, traffic enforcement or speed enforcement. You can see that we've done 2,500 motor vehicle enforcement actions throughout the year, 525 motor vehicle stops, 218 crash investigations. However, we do use a considerable amount of discretion with only 56 motor vehicle citations issued. So we try to be as even light-handed as opposed to heavy-handed as we can be. I spaced out the 90 mental health-related calls, and what that means is it could be anything from an assist the fire department with somebody in crisis. It could be a domestic violence call that had a mental illness component to it. We, along with the fire department, combined to do what's called a Section 12, which is either a voluntary or an involuntary committal to a mental health facility, and that's included in that number. That number, I'm gonna guess, is probably low because I leave it up to the individual officers to make the determination on every call that they go on to see if there is a mental health component to it. Our computer system doesn't automatically flag it like it does for a traffic accident, cause of the crash. So 90 is the number we come up with. That's a manually entered number after the case is done. And I trust their judgment on whether it's a mental health related calls for service or not. But if we went through a deep dive on every single call, I think that number would be higher. So that's a low estimate. Still, I think it's a high number. But I know members of the board have always been fascinated with the calls for service numbers, and I'll be happy to answer any questions before I move on.
I have a question on the mental health-related calls. If a person has to be transported to another facility, who does that?
It's done by the ambulance.
Okay,
And what's interesting to note when we talk about the fire department's assistance with this, the police department's overtime and callback system is different from the fire department. So if we come across somebody who has to be Section 12 or committed to the hospital or transported to a mental health facility, that's usually a full ambulance response. So when that ambulance leaves town, they call in overtime to fill that slot. Unfortunately, we don't. So if we have a 3-officer shift and we usually accompany the patient to the hospital to make sure everything's safe and secure in the ambulance, that means that ambulance trip, which is usually about an hour on average, that's an hour of the town being left without one police officer. So we run short for about an hour.
could I, one more question?
Please.
So when that occurs, does that call immediately become part of the fire department budget or the police department?
It's gonna be split. The fire department would incur its cost for that run, and we don't usually incur a cost with that because we don't backfill that position with overtime unless that officer has to be stationed at the hospital. Maybe the subject's in custody at that point, and we have to stay with that person,
Thank you.
okay?
John,
You're
please.
welcome.
Yeah, thanks, Chief. The unattended deaths investigated, that's not the total number of people that expire without a witness, is it?
It does not count deaths that occur in the home under hospice or do not resuscitate. That number is unfortunately, we do a well-being check and we find somebody who's expired.
Okay.
Somebody from our reassurance list fails to call in and we find them expired in their home. And those are usually all ones that, when we notify the state police, because they're the ultimate jurisdiction on any death in our town, they would decline based on the circumstances. They would decline along with the medical examiner.
Okay.
Those are the ones we deal directly with a funeral home.
So those are like natural causes?
Yes,
Okay.
yeah, anything suspicious, the state police would take jurisdiction.
And then the next one, the town bylaw violations, 181. Can you give me an example or two of what that is?
Noise,
Noise
illegal
complaints.
dumping, parking, sleeping in public, types of unregistered motor vehicles or tents or campers on property, usually that.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Chief, I imagine I know the general contour of the answer, but if you were to portion these out to June, July, August, what rough percentage of 6,000 calls would you anticipate or suggest occur in that 3-month period of time?
That's a great question. So the easy answer to that, it would be hard for me to say it would be we have a spike in this call, but not this call. You would be surprised at how many traditional calls for service maintain a solid baseline throughout the year. If you could just step back and look at it from like 10,000 feet and what we would describe as like a quality of life type call, the parkings, the noise, the parties, mostly the ones that are covered under the town bylaw violations. Do we have more traffic crashes in the summer? Yes, only because there's more vehicles.
Right.
But over the past 2 years since COVID, we found that the data indicates that there's more people here year-round since COVID. So that traditional, when everybody rolls the sidewalks up after New Year's and then returns in May, that doesn't exist anymore.
Right, okay. That's helpful, thank you. Okay, other questions for Chief? Andy, please.
Chief, and maybe this is also a question for Chief Devano, but Governor Baker and his administration pushed through some major changes in the way that social services were delivered, including the establishment of community health clinics that presumably were helping to deal with mental health-related calls. You know, do you anticipate using that more than you have been?
That's a great question. In this budget, under a different department, we came in front of the select board and we asked for one mental health clinician full-time. Because I feel, and as well as the rest of the town departments that would be involved in this program, we need it. The select board was generous enough to acknowledge that we did not need one, we needed two. And they approved two full-time positions. So it's my hope, and I'm sure Chief Justin's hope, that we would rely less on the outside agencies and use this position as a direct link, because right now that link doesn't exist. And to be quite honest, if that position, we're successful in hiring that position and implementing that position, we'd be one of the first agencies on the Cape to have that, and we would be well ahead of the crowd in that position. And it serves our citizens far better than having to rely on a follow-up after an agency that, quite frankly, sometimes leaves us in the lurch.
I don't want to steal Chief Anderson's thunder here. I could answer this when I come back up, but I'll just piggyback on that. So one of the initiatives there is that there used to be, there's a program called Community Paramedicine. And the fees for that, you used to have to pay fees to engage in that sort of service. They used to be exorbitant. So the fees have recently dropped significantly. Prior to this change in fee structure, it used to be really cost prohibitive, especially for a town our size to even think about it. With that decrease in fee, which is the state sets, it's something that is going to be a focus of ours in the next year. We have a new EMS captain taking over with the retirement of Mark Heller in April, and we've already identified that as a priority to look at in the next year.
Norma, please.
Will either of these two new positions be involved with a school where there are crises all the time?
Yes.
And they're getting much worse?
Yes.
Will that tie in with your mental health related calls?
Excellent question. The answer is 100% yes. The girl from Harwich, her name is it Sheila House? It would be very similar to her role in the Harwich side of the school.
Thank you.
And Chief, is this a position where the employee would be responding on site with officers or with the FD? Is that how it's anticipated? Is they going to be in an office and people are making appointments? How do we anticipate?
Yep, a little bit of both.
Okay.
We would bring this clinician with us if it was safe to do so. Or we could assist the clinician at a follow-up appointment, just to provide any breach of the peace protection. But we envision this clinicians to hopefully be involved in our day-to-day operations.
Terrific.
Yeah.
Sounds like a great program.
I agree.
Okay, Barbara, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Chief, in your prior year accomplishments, it talks about the act relative to justice, equity, and accountability in law enforcement that's been implemented. Has that caused any changes? And what is the definition of equity?
How about this? When this was proposed, there was great anxiety amongst the law enforcement community. I didn't share that anxiety because if you look at this legislation and this post new requirements, basically it's a licensing for police. I mean, if you wanted to be a barber, you have to get a license and you have to renew your license. And if you make mistakes at a barber, they could pull your license. Basically, all the police officers will be licensed and certified by post, which is an extra level of accountability that's provided by the state, which is technically a civilian review board. So to circle back on the anxiety, I don't share that only because if you are a police officer and you do everything the way you are supposed to do it, you have nothing to worry about. And that's the way we do business here. It also gives police administrators and communities an ability to remove problem police officers from rosters. And as you know, usually these rosters are union rosters. And in Massachusetts, if you're a member of a union, it's very difficult for you to get fired or removed. There are several procedural hurdles that you have to overcome and several appeal processes. And this allows the post commission to, in fact, if they find your violations egregious enough, you could be decertified. And quite frankly, we welcome that.
Thanks.
Okay, Chief, back to you. Any more slides, I'm assuming?
I don't have any particular order, so I apologize. One of our capital requests is for, it's called the Police Special Operations Vehicle. In layman's terms, it's our pickup truck. The current vehicle that we have right now is a 2010 F-150, 8-foot bed. That's pictured on the left. It looks good from a distance. And she does have low mileage. However, that vehicle is due for several costly repairs consisting of the replacement of the powertrain and several body parts due to wear. We've got our money's worth from that vehicle. It was a 13-year vehicle. What we're proposing and looking for is an F-250. That's an F-250 on the right, obviously that's from the Massachusetts State Police. What you'll see then, the difference is what we would be looking for in that picture on the right is you can see it's a little bit beefier truck. It's got a little bit greater ground clearance. It has a much larger tow capacity. We're not really concerned about the bed. We would be reducing that down to a 6-foot bed. Our primary duty with that is to get places where we couldn't get to with a police car or to tow one of our several trailers that we have. One of our trailers contains an ATV. One of our trailers could tow any other supplemental equipment that we have to or from a scene. And it would have the ability to have a snowplow attached to it. Over the past couple of years, we've had instances where we might have a cruiser stuck, or we might need to get to a residence, or to get to a street, or to get to a hazard in the middle of an event that hasn't been cleared by the town yet. This would allow us to do that. This would not be for routine snow plowing, subcontracting, but this would be, if we were to put a snow plow on this, we could access residents that the last snowstorm, I believe, the harbor master had a 2-person crew out delivering people to and from the warming station. And they were armed with shovels to dig people in and dig people out. And that's the reasons why we would be looking to upgrade that vehicle to an F-250 pickup truck. And the cost, if you don't have it in front of you, it's a $70,000 capital request.
All right, thank you.
I hate to say as usual, but as usual, we'd be asking for 2 annual cruiser replacements. The $100,000 is roughly the same as last year. The reason why it hasn't rose considerably is most of the equipment that we had to change last year and the year before with the new body style, we don't have to this year. So we can easily take the cages and the equipment from the current vehicles and move them into the new vehicles. The reasons why, again, we keep these cruiser replacements new and every year is, quite frankly, we use them 24 hours a day, 365 days a year. And when we get past the warranty or the trade-in period, they decrease severely, that we have to pay more money to get them fixed, or we don't get a lot of money as a trade-in. So that usually, the 2-year window is usually what we go by, and this will just keep it in that 2-year window.
And Chief, how many Explorers are in the total fleet?
Andy Goddard is our fleet manager. I'll have him speak to any fleet questions that you have.
Thank you. Welcome, Lieutenant.
Hi, thank you. We have 6 marked Explorers that we use for regular patrol, and then we have a couple of, we have one unmarked.
And do you ever find yourself being down a vehicle for maintenance, repairs, other?
Yes. Currently, we're down one vehicle that had a vehicle accident. We have a second one that's on limited duty. We've pushed it to the last out because of an exhaust issue. We've been working with Ford on that. It's a very long, involved process. But unfortunately, the wear and tear on these vehicles is tremendous because of the operating conditions. So at any one time, we could be down 1 or 2 cruisers. So we need to keep our fleet up and fresh and be able to be relied on.
Yep. Very good, thank you. Norma, question, please?
Yes, the F-250, what can that do that the Explorers cannot do, other than carry cargo?
The F-250 has a much more heavy duty and higher ground clearance. The cruisers themselves, they are all-wheel drive, but they're not a traditional 4-wheel drive. So they're great on the road in the snow and that kind of stuff. As soon as you try to go off-road, they're not going to do it. They're going to ground out, they're going to high center. So the F-250 gives us a tremendous amount of center ground clearance. We can get off the road. And by off-road, I mean as simply as going up to the Boy Scout camp or going out to the Stage Harbor Lighthouse, or anything like that. The cruisers can't make it out there. They're not equipped for that.
Could I ask one more question?
Please.
Would any thought given to 2 F-250s and 1 Explorer?
The F-250 is a specialized vehicle. It's not something that I would want to put on regular patrol. To equip it to be on regular patrol would be much more expensive. It would be prohibitive. The Explorers, that's our regular cruiser. We use that for almost everything that we do. Now, unlike the Crown Victorias of old, where we would have to switch back and forth in the wintertime, we don't have to do that with these. We can keep these on the road year-round. The F-250 is a very specialized vehicle for those extra things that we need to do. Hauling, carrying, off-road assignments, that kind of thing.
Thank you.
Andy, please.
Andy, in the years past, I remember there was always a reference to the cruisers coming off of apparently some sort of a state purchasing list. Is it still the case?
Yes, there's a couple of different municipal contracts that are out there. Greater Boston Police Council is one. There used to be a Plymouth County contract. What that does is it allows us to purchase off of that contract without going through a competitive bid price or process. Most of our stuff is through the Greater Boston Police Council, and so the price is set.
Okay, great, thank you.
Yep.
Okay, thank you, Andy, appreciate it. Chief, back to you.
In our temporary wages category, we've asked for $49,000, and that is for hopefully what we consider to be a return of the Main Street patrol, not in the traditional way that you guys probably remember it. But let me explain. So this is a community service officer program. Historically, when we had special or reserve police officers, we used to send them to an abbreviated police academy, an abbreviated certification program to become special officers with sworn police powers. Under that new Police Reform Act, that is no longer the case. So the ability for us to hire special police officers, that role has now been removed. So the only special police officers that you would see working in this community or other communities on the Cape would be police officers that have already retired after going to the full-time police officer academy. So what this allows us to do is these would be non-sworn, non-law enforcement positions. Now, before I go any further, Barnstable has a very robust program on their Main Street, as does Orleans. And if you're familiar with Orleans' Community Service Officer program, we're basically going to mirror that program. They would be uniformed similarly to what you see here. We're looking to hire 4. When we've made contact with merchants, store owners on Main Street, we do safety presentations, hostile workplace, how to deal with problem customers or employees. And there's usually a question and answer period at the end. And pretty much every location we go to, there's a question similar to, hey, we don't see enough of you on Main Street, or how come there's no more specials on Main Street? And that's why. Quite honestly, the past 2 years, you haven't seen a lot of us on Main Street is because we've been down. Last summer alone, we were down five police officers, 4 vacancies, and we had injuries. On a side note, you'll see later in the budget, we're looking for a little bit added funding for uniforms because since July, we've been able to fill 4 full-time positions. 2 are working today, and we've got 2 in the second week of the police academy today. So by June, July of next year, we should be full staff minus 1. But still, it's very difficult to give downtown that attention that it used to get with that dedicated downtown Main Street. 2 years ago during COVID, they used to have COVID ambassadors by the county that would walk Main Street, and they would answer questions, and they would hand out like informational flyers about masks and distancing. We found out that we assumed that that person or that responsibility was going to be met with a lot of hostility or opposition. And quite frankly, they were welcomed, and they turned into more, you know, where's the lighthouse? Can I park here? Where are the restrooms? As opposed to COVID compliance ambassadors. So we recognize the need for that. And the system already works. There's a program already in place, and it's working well in Orleans. They'd be assigned to walking beats. We have bicycle patrols. We just purchased an electric e-bike. We're in the process of purchasing a second e-bike. They do not have any law enforcement powers. However, they will have the ability to write parking tickets. And with the bike patrol, their patrol area could expand to the lighthouse, Oyster Pond. And if the program, you know, if the program goes well, we could see these community service officer programs patrolling other parking hotspots, like Schoolhouse Pond is always a hotspot. But that's what that is for. And I think, and again, I don't want to sound like a broken record, but what I told the select board is I think that this program is the right program at the right time in the right community, now that everybody's back. And I think the town would get a tremendous return on its investment for this.
Andy, please.
Chief, applause. We've needed this for a long time.
Thank you, I agree.
And you know, it was, in some years in the past, it wasn't always good going. There were certain officers that got a little over-enthusiastic. But on the other hand, the whole CSO idea, I think, is great. I've seen it working in Orleans. I saw it working in Hyannis. How long a season do you anticipate?
Well, this would be a budget item, so the earliest we could probably roll them out it would be on or about July 1st. We do have some supplemental funding sources in our current budget that we could procure some of the uniforms ahead of time and maybe identify some of these, these candidates ahead of time. Where would we look for these candidates? We would look for, for example, Cape Cod Community College has an intern program for criminal justice. Maybe some of these young people want to be police officers someday. We've already received 2 applications, even though we haven't advertised for it, so word of mouth does work. They would be very motivated to be on the team because they want to come back and hopefully start their career here. I'm sorry, I hope that answered your question.
It does, and I hadn't even thought of the idea that, in a sense, this could be a farm team as well, right, for the CPD.
Yep, that's the goal.
But I think it's great. That's a great idea.
Thank you, I
strongly support
appreciate
it.
that.
Barbara, please.
Chief, I think it's a great idea, too. I was wondering, will any of these non-officers be able to help you out answering calls for parking violations or some of the town bylaw violations that are not violent?
We'd really have to look at how much authority that they would have to issue bylaw tickets. But as far as a parking ticket, yes, they could direct traffic. We could supplement, for example, there's usually a delivery truck issue or a double parking issue on Main Street that requires a full-time police officer to show up and direct traffic. They would not be allowed to book a crash, but they could direct traffic. We could use these positions to supplement us for like the 4th of July parade as traffic posts. But again, under the post, they're not sworn, so their duties as far as enforcement is very limited.
Okay.
Good question.
All right, thank you, Chief.
Okay. So, in our, excuse me, in our uniforms and equipment, we've asked for an additional $10,000 to bring that number up to 46.5. That is not reflective here. What that is because we are fortunate enough now to have 4 new police officers. That's 4 new sets of uniforms, 4 new sets of duty belts, 4 new firearms, 4 new ballistic vests. The average cost right now to outfit a police officer is in the range of about $4,000 to $5,000 from head to toe. The equipment is not cheap, and the ability to shop around is limited because if you know, there's really only one police supply store on the Cape, and they pretty much dictate, how and where we do business. We will pay the added price for the convenience. So the $10,000 that's not indicated in a slide, that $10,000 was because of the 4 new additions to help cover that cost. What you see here is an additional $10,000, and this is for what we call a hostile event response, active shooter response. Right now in the police vehicle, the officer is armed with a sidearm, and since July, all of the cruisers have had patrol rifles in them. We made the decision after July to move those patrol rifles from the trunk. So if, for example, you needed immediate access to that, for some unfortunate reason, you needed immediate access to that patrol rifle, you'd have to exit the police vehicle, open the trunk, punch in the code, take the drawer out, and then deploy the weapon. We just followed pretty much every other law enforcement agency on the planet and brought that vehicle into the passenger compartment. It is very secure. In addition to that patrol rifle, they have their own body armor. That body armor will stop most handgun projectiles. It will not stop a rifle bullet. Unfortunately, most active shooter events, the shooter is armed, unfortunately, with a rifle, a high-powered rifle. What you see on the left is what's commonly called a plate carrier, And what that does is there's a heavy-duty ballistic ceramic plate that fits about the size of your torso. And that's designed to be kept in the vehicle and then worn in response to an active threat or to be worn for a planned hostile possible action that we have to take. These would not be everyday use. You would not see the police officers walking down Main Street with the ballistic carrier on it. But basically what this does, it's two things. It keeps you protected. It increases your protection because it increases my officer's protection to protect you. This provides an extra level of security to stop handguns and high-powered rifles, and unfortunately, it's the high-powered rifles that are doing all the damage, most of the damage in these hostile events. Also, if you notice the type of material that it's made of, it's called like a MOLLE system, and basically what that means is in addition to what you see here, we can preload these with equipment such as like first aid kits, tourniquets, any type of safety equipment, medical equipment that the officers can use on themselves, their brother or sister police officers, or members of the public. On the back, it would be clearly marked with police on it. But again, they would be in each cruiser, not assigned to each officer, but they would be in each cruiser. The ballistic helmet, which you see on the right, again, blunt trauma. It stops a fist, it stops a rock, it stops a bat. It will not stop a bullet, but it might stop a ricochet. It just is designed to protect the officer's head from any type of blunt force trauma that may be incurred during the event or after the event. And again, I just, if I could just deliver the message home, the police officer armed with this extra added safety equipment, it's one thing that police officer has to worry about as they're going into the call that they do not want to go on, and the call they've not wanted for their career. This is the call that they've never wanted to respond to. But again, the Chatham Police Department is late to the party with this, and we appreciate your support with this.
Mr. Chair.
John, please.
Yeah, thanks, Chief. I'm surprised we don't have it already. Hope you never have to use it. I support getting it.
Thank you.
And I noticed in the write-up of last year's this year's accomplishments, mention of, I don't know what you call it, active shooter or hostile activity training in schools. Can you talk a little bit about that and also about what training the CPD goes through for the community?
Great
with respect
question.
to that?
Deputy Chief Lou Malzone is going to answer that question. He is also currently on the Cape Cod Regional SWAT team. And he was one of the officers that facilitated our most recent training. If you saw us on the Facebook, we had multiple officer response to hostile events at the Gannon Training Center in Yarmouth, which was excellent. So, Deputy Malzone.
Good afternoon. Thank you. That's a great question. Myself and Lieutenant Goddard, for the past 6 to 7 years, have been conducting tactical training with the department. We took a little hiatus from it the past couple of years for the same reason that we took a hiatus from a lot of things, right? The pandemic. We just got back into our tactical training. This year, we utilized the Gannon Center, the Yarmouth Police Department, for 2 days, doing high-risk situations, active shooter-type situations, hostage-type situations, people in crisis-type situations. And the basis of the training was really to increase the decision-making in officers in high-stress tactical situations and just to better equip them with the opportunity to making those better decisions. And it was a great 2 days, and we're hoping to do it again in the spring.
John, please.
Yeah, thank you for that. I don't know if this is for you or for the chief. Are those trainings paid for by Chatham, or are there grants or funds available to make those trainings available? And a follow-up would be, do you think you're getting enough training, or do you want more training?
They are paid for by our department, correct? Paid for by our department. We are increasing those days. We're always looking for more training. Again, something that all of us hope we never have to utilize. But, as you know, a better trained, better equipped police officer has an opportunity to make better decisions under stress. So, yeah, we're always looking to increase it.
Well, I appreciate that. You'd have my full support for whatever training you think you need to keep our community safe. Thank you.
Thank you.
Norma, please.
I'm not particularly obtuse, but I do have a lot of questions. All that looks very good, but when an officer needs it, I can't imagine a situation where he can say, you'll have to wait a minute, I have to put on my protective gear. At what point, when a call comes in, do you have to make a judgment call? Is this the time to put on that before you respond? Or do you have to wait until you respond and then hope you've made the right decision?
Yes, to all of that. It would certainly be, based on the officer's perception of what they're getting dispatched to. And given the opportunity to put that on, you're better protected. But there are situations where you may not be able to take the 2 minutes to put that on, and you might have to act immediately. So the initial responding officers, hopefully they would have an opportunity. If they don't, they have to make a decision and proceed. But the officers backing them up would likely have the opportunity to put that stuff on and be better protected.
That's a real chance that we are asking them to take. No, we're not asking them, we're telling them to take, and to me, that is a real safety. It's a question that I don't think I would want anyone in my family to have to face.
Right.
How can we change that?
Training. It's the only way we can prepare for it, right? You can't simulate the stress under those conditions. You can't simulate, real situations. So training, taking the time and train and being prepared for, again, things that none of us want to respond to.
Joanne, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. These are only Chatham. Thank you, Mr. Chair. These are only Chatham employees who are required to carry a firearm. They go out along with the firefighters every day to do their job, to keep us safe, and they are never 100% sure that they'll be able to come home at night the same as they were when they left the office in the morning. So we want to thank you for your service and all you do to keep us safe. My next question is, Chief, could you explain to our listening audience what the Quinn program is?
Thank you.
Because it does appear it is a charge on the expenses for the salaries.
I'm sorry, did you say the Quinn program?
Yes.
Okay, I'm going to paraphrase here a little bit because the Quinn Bill program used to be an incentive program by the state to reward educated police officers. So if a police officer had an associate's degree, a bachelor's degree, a master's degree, that police officer would get an additional percentage based on their base pay, depending upon the level of their higher education. And whatever that percentage was, whether it was 10%, 20%, or 30%, the state would pay for half of it, and the town would pay for the other half of that. Several years ago, the Quinn bill went away. It was voted out. So the town had the decision to either go with the state and eliminate the Quinn bill, or to continue to pay its half of the Quinn bill. We asked, and we were very luckily and were very gracious, that town government decided to take on the additional half from the state. So what we have now for the Quinn program is we have senior officers that still benefit from that program. However, instead of half and half, it's the town picks up 100% of that financial obligation. However, 1 or 2 union contracts ago, the police union and the town negotiated to grandfather the senior officers to keep the Quinn bill. However, newer officers, I forget which date the contract was. I think it was 2 contracts ago, to set up that new officers hired from that contract signing date going forward were subject to a educational stipend. So they don't benefit from the Quinn bill, the senior officers do.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Barbara, please.
Thank you. Chief, it looks to me as if there's only one set of those in each cruiser, and I'm thinking that if you got a call for a dangerous situation, there would probably be 2 officers going out. Shouldn't we have 2 sets per cruiser?
It is very, very rare that you'd have a cruiser with 2 people in it. I can't think of a time where a 2-person cruiser would be responding to an emergency unless the front seat passengers were a field training officer and a trainee, or somebody coming back and forth from a training program. Our cruises are designed for one officer occupancy.
Okay.
Chief, in the context of the discussion with the deputy around training, I was somewhat surprised to see that the training budget in the proposed budget is a tick over $5,000, which is 25% of what the band concert expenses are. Is there a reason why the training line item is $5,000 as opposed to something considerably larger? That doesn't seem like a very heavy training budget.
I think you're reading the wrong line of the I think there's another training line.
I look for a second
Look,
training, but
I believe it's under continuing education training seminars. I might have the line here. I don't have it in front of me.
Yeah, I've got total training at 5211.
Look under continuing education training seminars.
38,500.
That's the number. That's the training budget.
Okay. Is there a reason why these aren't consolidated into one training figure? Out of curiosity? Not to micromanage one's budget, but
I'd have to look at the line item and refer to Alex, but I know that there's a reason for it somewhere.
you can come back to me next year and answer me.
Yeah, okay.
Thank you.
Yep.
Okay?
So, on the topic of the training budget, we are looking to increase that training an additional $9,950. What you see in front of you, pardon me, is the Police Executive Research Forum's Senior Management Institute for Police. I will break that down. It is basically, it's a 3-week intensive senior level management course for police executives. It is, it's designed for mid to upper police executives who ultimately will lead police agencies. It's the Senior Management Institute for Police, or SMIP. It brings together leading thinkers in corporate and public management to provide intensive training in the latest management theories and practice, innovative solutions to organizational problems, and discussion of important issues in managing public service organizations effectively. The program's goal is to give police managers the same quality of management education available to other leaders in the public and private sectors. I cannot speak highly about this program. I am a graduate of it. It was held at Boston University. It's held in the summer, June and July. It's taught by Harvard Business, various corporate heads, very little law enforcement. It's all public value, public practice, analytical situations, analytical theories. I was very, very fortunate to attend this. We felt it, I felt it important enough. We've sent Lieutenant Goddard to it. He's attended. And the only one from my command staff now who hasn't attended is Deputy Malzone. And I plead with you that this is what separates the Chatham Police Department from any other police agency on Cape Cod. You may be familiar with the FBI Academy. That's a multi-week, I think it's 10 weeks, 11 weeks. We're too small of an agency. I can't let one of my commanders go to Virginia for 10 weeks, 11 weeks for a management training when, quite frankly, I feel that this training is equal to or superior to. It's an incredible, it's an incredible opportunity to rethink the way your philosophical foundations in police work are formed. I still refer to several publications, and I still refer to several contacts and references that I've made in that program, and I think I went 11 years ago. Andy went 2019. It's excellent. It is, again, I believe that their participation is what separates us from the rest of the Cape. And again, the price might seem a little high, but what you get for just under $10,000 is a career's worth of experience and knowledge and reference material going forward, and it's a tremendous asset. I belong to their organization. I've vouched for this program to other police departments, and I would appreciate your support with this.
Well, for what it's worth, Chief, I know when I guess Sergeant Goddard was up for the prospect of going to the course, 3 or 4 years ago, this committee was enthusiastically supportive of his attendance. So I imagine you would find us to be supportive of this for the Deputy Chief as well.
Thank you very much.
Norma, please.
If someone were to ask you, what is the most pressing need in the Chatham Police Department, what is the answer?
If you asked me 6 months ago, I would say recruitment and retention. Now I'm going to say retention, because I think our recruitment efforts have been fairly successful. We were able to be, one of the things that I asked for as far as recruitment was the creation and the offer of a signing bonus and a recruitment bonus. And I'm very grateful for the town management to agree with me and grant that. I don't think that was the reason why that we received 2 lateral transfers, which means full-time police officers have just come here from other full-time police agencies. And that's probably the first time in about 12 or 13 years that the Chatham Police Department has had a lateral transfer come to us as opposed to leave and to go to what they thought were greener pastures. I don't think that the signing bonus or the recruitment bonus was the only reason. And quite frankly, if it was the only reason, I'd be suspect about that. But now the fire department shares that same benefit, and I know other police departments on the Cape have that. So a long way to answer your question. Now I think that the recruitment part of that question has been answered. Now it's the retention, and I think there's housing forums coming up. We suffer comparison from other communities on what they pay their town employees. I will say this, I've asked my department from the top on down, why some choose to stay and when they could leave and make, more money in another community. And so far they say that they like the culture here. And so if we can maintain our culture, that helps with our retention. And, if we're able to be on par with other communities as far as pay and benefits, we've already seen that the select board and the finance committee supports public safety. We don't come to you and ask for things that we think are unreasonable. I hope this presentation wasn't, something that was unreasonable. So again, we appreciate your support. And I think that the retention issue that we have is the same thing that the fire department has. It's the same thing that the highway department has. But that, I think that solution is not just something that I'm responsible for. I think we all are, and I think we can get there.
Okay, Andy, question, please, I think?
Chief, is this 9,950 already in the budget?
It is not.
Or is this an add to it?
This would be an addition, yes.
Okay,
Thank you.
thank you.
Okay, is that it for the slides?
It is, but I have one more thing is,
Yeah, keep
is you'll
going.
notice, I think the largest jump that I haven't mentioned yet is in operational supplies. There's an $8,000 increase. I think it's line 38. That brings the total to $18,100. And quite frankly, what that's for is ammunition, as crazy as that sounds. We've got 2 new police academy candidates, and they have the range coming up in the spring, and they go through a lot of ammunition. Currently, we have 1 mandatory firearms training for the department that we have to do for the state. We do that in 2 bites. We do the range date for state qualifications outside during the daytime. If you've seen, sometimes we have a trailer truck parked out back. It's a mobile firearms range, which allows us to train at night or low light or under blue light conditions. We train with our flashlights, and we can do it in that environment, and that costs money, and that's an additional ammunition. And his response, John, to your training, this year, we're adding a 4th training module to our firearms, and it's going to be simunitions. And that's basically live firing with paint marking projectiles, which piggybacks on the training that we just conducted at the Gannon Center with simunitions. Unfortunately, ammunition costs a lot of money lately, and just to satisfy that huge demand for the firearms ammunition costs, that's what the $8,000 is for.
Okay, further questions for Chief? Chief, I had a couple as I was sort of thinking about the budget and some of the other issues that are confronting the town of Chatham in various ways. I guess I'm curious what, of your views, the implications of the housing situation on the Cape. Is that adversely impactful to the department and its operations?
So, that's a great question. I'll just say this. Your question was asked to me by someone else from another committee. And their primary concern was officer tardiness. You know, if an officer lives so far away, you know, what if they're late?
Right.
Or you know, what if they're late for their shift? So we used to have what was called a crow flies rule, where it was some arbitrary number, 25 miles, straight line from the police station, you draw a radius, and those days are long gone. Quite frankly, I'll take a police officer that's capable of doing the job here just to live on this side of the bridge. So if that's the case, let's say that officer now lives in Sandwich. Well, that might not be a big deal in February, but it might be a big deal in July.
Right.
But again, I'm not concerned about that officer being late. If that officer is working a double, let's say he works 8 o'clock to 4 o'clock, and then he has to work 4 to midnight, and then he has 8 hours off to come back tomorrow to work another double, another 16, which is very common. So now that officer has to leave Chatham and drive to Sandwich. He's got 8 hours between his shift. So it takes him an hour to get home. It takes him an hour to come back the next morning. I'm sure, depending upon which shift that is, whether it's a day shift, eve shift, or a mid shift, that officer has stuff to do at home. They don't automatically just go to bed. So there is a sleep factor And like I told the member from the other committee, I said, I'm not concerned about officer tardiness. I am very concerned with officer wellness, and that fatigue factor is front and center. I'm very aware of the fact that sometimes there may be officers that are working on limited amount of sleep that are out there patrolling, and we try to do the best we can to minimize that. Whether we allow them to do shift swaps or take additional time off or show up late because the shift might be heavy enough that if they were absent for a couple hours, they wouldn't be missed. Depending upon the shift minimums, we might have enough that, this officer could be 2 hours late, put in some time, leave time for 2 hours, no problem, or go home early. But it is a battle, and it's almost an every shift concern.
Okay.
That's a good question.
That's helpful, thank you. Second question, and the last question for me. Insofar as the retention questions are concerned, as you look at the landscape of competitive wages in communities nearby, how do we stand?
I don't have that information readily available in front of me. I would like to think that we are probably average, but I don't think we are. I don't think we are. I think we're
Meaning
below.
Below average?
Yeah.
Okay. Culture is important. Culture is incredibly, and obviously within an organization is extraordinarily powerful, but obviously it's not the only thing. So, especially when retention's concerned.
Thank
Okay.
you.
Further questions for the chief? All right.
Thank you very much. It's been my pleasure. Thank
How'd it
you.
go your first year?
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you for your time. Chief Tavano, welcome.
Welcome, thank you. Get my slides pulled up here. Good afternoon, I'm Chief Justin Tavano, also serve as the Emergency Management Director for the town. I took over in that capacity on December 1st. I know most of you folks on the committee, but I want to thank you for the opportunity to present to you today. I'm going to start with a little bit of an introduction to this year's budget cycle for us, and then I'll bring you through some slides. Similar to Chief Anderson, we'll look at some incident data over the last 10-year period, but also we'll drill down a little bit on 2022's data. And then I'm going to kind of shift gears and take a different route and bring you through the digital budget book, which went into effect this year. I know you guys have probably seen the hard copy. I'm not sure if you've delved much into the digital version, but I'll link us over to that and we'll look at the budget kind of as a line-by-line process that way. Just so as an introduction, the fire department's proposing a $4,383,244 operating budget for FY24. Which is a 4% increase over the adopted FY23 operating budget. Most of the increases on the personnel side of the budget are contractual, totaling $3,855,987. The increases to the expense side of the budget are either inflationary or due to increases in service contracts and fees. And this accounts for $527,257 of the total FY24 operating budget. Fire department's not seeking any new positions for FY24 and is not proposing any significant changes in services. The 4 positions which have been added to the roster over the past 2 budget cycles have proven extremely valuable as the fire department continues to see increases in total call volume and ambulance transports. One supplemental budget request worth noting is an additional $30,000 in overtime funding, beyond the 3% contractual increase. One major challenge the fire department has faced for the past several years is the recruitment of fully qualified and trained personnel. We have been extremely fortunate to have landed exemplary employees with each of our new hires during this time. However, sometimes finding the right person for the position requires us to take someone who might not meet all of the qualifications of the ideal candidate we're looking for. For example, they're already trained to be a firefighter and they're already trained to be a paramedic. And we need to look at who the right person for the job is. And in those cases, if they don't meet all of those higher level certifications, it requires an investment from us as a department and us as a town to bring them to those certification levels. But through the application and interview process, that particular candidate might have rose to the top as a person of character that we wanted to add to our team. So in those circumstances, it requires obviously a financial investment, but also an investment of time in the employee. Of the past 8 hires dating back to July 2021, we've supported 4 through paramedic training. 2 have been sent out to the State Fire Academy, and a 3rd was sponsored by the department to attend the Call and Volunteer Fire Academy and had just achieved certification prior to being hired in a full-time capacity. There have been significant changes in the training landscape over the past 3 to 4 years. COVID resulted in the postponement of several fire, EMT, and paramedic training sessions. The Barnstable County Fire Academy closure has eliminated what used to be our main source of entry-level training. Course offerings at the state level require significant travel and are extremely backed up. Our most recent hire began her employment in September and will just be heading off to the Fire Academy in April. That was the soonest class we could get her into. So that requested $30,000 in additional overtime funding is to cover the shifts of these new employees while they attend these courses to either achieve paramedic and/or firefighter 1 and 2 certification. So before I continue, I would like to just thank this committee for your past support in ensuring that our department and our members have had the adequate resources to perform our services safely, efficiently, and effectively. We have a great team at the fire department, as I'm sure you're all well aware, and we're proud of them every day. So just to start off with some incident data from calendar year, going back to 2013, so this is a snapshot of a 10-year period culminating in 2022. It's difficult to really see the trend line. You see some kind of outliers, 2018, 2019, 2020. 2020, we all know what happened in 2020, resulted in a significant dip in our calls. That was the COVID year. For a variety of reasons, folks were afraid to go to the hospital. Our ambulance calls went way down. Our calls for service went way down as the uncertainty over COVID and transmission really left people uneasy and left people not calling for help when they needed it. So we see a big dip in 2020. In 2018 and in 2018, we had the busiest March we've ever had. I don't know if anybody can recall that winter, but we ended up in that polar vortex cycle where we had a series of nor'easters that really pounded us. So if you took out, we were about 300 calls over average for that March. If you took those out, you'd kind of start to see that trend line stay consistently going up as opposed to really spiking. In 2019, similar, we had that was the year of our tornado. So that really spiked that month as well. So a similar situation there. If you took about those 200 to 300 calls above our average for that particular month, if you kind of could imagine that by bringing us down a line on each of those years, you'd see that trend line. So then you look at 2021 and 2022 and you see, where we're at today. So going back to the 4 positions we've added, they were critical. Without that, the support that you folks gave us and the select board and town manager and the taxpayers, we'd really be scrambling to staff these calls. So this is just a similar look, but it just looks at total ambulance transports, which obviously is just one function of what we perform at the fire department. But you see kind of a similar structure there. Interestingly enough, we did see in the total call volume for 2018, kind of that big spike was because of those winter storms. I'm not sure why we did so many transports in 2018, but we did. It had nothing to do with the storms. So that was a little bit of an outlier when you look at the year-by-year comparisons. But taking that outlier out, we were kind of stayed a little bit plateaued for a number of years, and then 2021, 2022, we started to really jump again. This just takes a look at some ambulance revenue over the, rather than the calendar year period, it looks at the fiscal year periods, so starting in FY13 to present. FY23, obviously we're in, so this is that's projected out, that last column you see on the right. So ambulance revenue is really starting to skyrocket. The way I've projected that, That takes real revenue, real receipts up through January of this year. And then I took last year's revenue from February through June and used that kind of as the numbers to fill in those projections. If we took in the same revenue for those months last year as if we carried that forward to this year, that's where it would bring us to, up over $800,000 for the fiscal year.
Chief, does that represent the higher revenue per run or more runs or some combination thereof?
It's more runs. So our ambulance fees have not changed. So that's just the billing company is doing a better job with receipts. Some of it is Medicare is doing a better job paying, but a lot of it has to do with just the increased call volume.
Very good, thank you.
And this is just a quick snapshot. We'll get into the ambulance billing line item in our expense budget shortly. But the blue columns that you see is the 4% that we pay for ambulance billing right now. We use a third-party billing company to do our ambulance billing. The company's Coastal Medical Billing. Right now, they charge 4%, and it's based on revenue, not the bills that they send out. So for every dollar in revenue that they bring in for the town, they charge us 4 cents. So that's the blue. I've spoken with that vendor. They don't have any anticipated fee increases, but as we've all seen, sometimes these fee increases can just pop up out of nowhere. We don't have a multi-year contract with them. They don't really offer those. We're billed on a monthly basis. So the 4% is the blue. That's what we're paying now. So if we project out what I anticipate to bring in revenue this year, that'll put us up over about $32,000 and change in what it costs us to have that company do the billing for us. If they had a 0.5% increase, which is not a huge increase, obviously, that brings us to the orange, which would be 4.5%. So for the same revenue brought in, that would push us well up above $35,000. So the good news is that the more, these bills go up, but it's based on the amount of revenue coming in. This takes a little bit of a snapshot of 2022 specifically, broken down into how we codify our calls. They cluster them. We report to the National Fire Incident Reporting System, and they have a series of codes, and then they have subcodes within those codes. So one of them is just fire calls. They have a section called Rescue and EMS. So the darker blue is fire, represents just under 1.5% of our total calls. Our rescue and EMS, that's going to be all of our ambulance calls. It could be water rescue-related calls, searches for people on land, motor vehicle accidents. We have hazardous conditions making up just under 5% of our calls. That could be electrical issues, carbon monoxide calls, gas leaks, things of that nature. The yellow is service calls, which is about 8.5%. This would be water leaks in the home, so something not a significant hazard, but something that folks call us for to come out and assist with. It could be a vehicle lockout, those sorts of calls. So typically not your emergent calls, but things that we go out and assist the public with. A good intent call, an example of that would be somebody saw a lot of smoke in the area. They didn't see it coming from a particular house, and they call the fire department to go and investigate. And we find out that it's, we're in burning season, and it's a heavier atmosphere day, and the smoke just isn't kind of rising the way it normally would. A false alarm or a false call is when we get activated for a fire alarm, whether it's at a commercial property, a monitored alarm in the home, or somebody, what we call a local alarm, so ones that don't ring out to an alarm company, but the homeowner calls us themselves. That's the green, so it's just about 15% is when we go out to investigate an alarm and find out that it was either a malfunction or an unintentional, maybe it was set off by cooking, so just some smoke in the home, but not of a emergent nature. And then taking up a very small percentage is our severe weather and natural disaster standby. That's when we bring folks into the station to stand by for severe weather events. It's beefing up our staffing for those big winter storms or tropical storms in the summer. And then we have special incidents and details, which is a small percentage as well. So just a quick little snapshot as to kind of what we do throughout the year. And then within those categories, our rescue and EMS, like I said, that's about 64% of our total call volume. And then within that, we have subcategories such as basic life support transports, advanced life support transports, motor vehicle accidents. So there's subcategories to that main category of rescue and EMS as well.
Chief, I think John has a question, please.
Thanks, Chief. I remember a few years back, we were reviewing this information, and I think it would be under the rescue EMS category, it was like 930 slip and falls and transports to the hospital. Is that still the major contributor to that category?
Slips and falls in particular?
Yeah.
No, it's not a major contributor. I don't have the data in front of me today on how many slips and falls we go to. It's a little bit more difficult to kind of pull that out of our calls, but I don't think it's that high.
Okay.
A majority of those rescue and EMS calls is what we refer to as an ALS transport, an advanced life support transport,
okay.
which is more of your respiratory nature, your cardiac nature, strokes, anything of a higher priority. Whereas a basic life support call would be more like first aid, lacerations, broken bones, and that sort of thing.
You know what? One other question. I thought you defined. I think it was service call. Your example was water in the home. So like people call you instead of a plumber.
Potentially, yeah. Sometimes we'll get a phone call from a passerby that they see. Last week with the extreme cold weather we had, we went to just an unprecedented number of water leaks from burst pipes. Sometimes we get called for an automatic fire alarm. The fire alarm system trips, and we get there, and the reason that it tripped is because water was getting into the detectors. So sometimes they're unoccupied homes. Sometimes it's a commercial property. Sometimes somebody, like I said, is a passerby that just sees water coming out of the basement windows. We've gone to extreme ones where the entire basement's been filled up with water. We've gone to them before where it's been caught early by the alarm system being triggered, and we've been able to get in and secure the water to the home and prevent quite a bit of damage. All right, this appears a little smaller than I would have liked, but this is just a section on some of the grants that we've been successful with over the past several years. Our AFG grants is our Assistance to Firefighting grants. It's a FEMA grant program. We've been very fortunate to be successful with these over the past several years. I just recently submitted. We won't find out for a number of months whether we're successful with it or not, but I did put in a $100,000 training grant. This is an extremely competitive grant process that you're awarded points for. Some of the equipment that qualifies is it's categorized as low priority, medium priority, and high priority within the application process. So anything that you're potentially applying for that's in the lower medium, you're very unlikely to get a grant for that. We're very fortunate in town that both through the AFG grant process and through taxpayer funding, we've been able to improve, replace all of our critical equipment. So most of our equipment right now doesn't qualify for AFG grants, which is extraordinary. So for this year, I put in for a training grant. I'll get into kind of what we're looking for with that in a few moments. But just to give you an idea of some of the things we've gotten in the past several years, I'm not sure if you folks remember last year in a capital plan, we asked for repeater systems for our vehicles for $65,000. We were successful in getting grant funding for that, so that came off the capital last year. The year prior, we were awarded $75,000 for Lucas CPR devices. These are automatic CPR machines, which we have 4 of, 3 for each of the ambulances, and then 1 in reserve, which can kind of float. So when we have the 4th of July parade and we have our UTV downtown, we would put the 4th unit on that, so we'd have something that can be more of a rapid response. Our training mannequin, we got $50,000 for a few years ago. It's a really, really high-tech training mannequin that has pulses and a heart rate and veins that flow blood, and our paramedics can do some really high-level training on. And then the year prior to that, we were awarded $86,000 for power load systems for our stretchers. And what those are is it's a lift system that's built into the ambulance. So when we put the stretcher up to the ambulance and lock it in, all we have to do is push a button and it lifts the patient up into the truck for us. Ms. Sprague?
Thank you. Would you explain the repeaters?
Yep.
Describe what that means?
Yeah, so the digital vehicle repeater systems, it's a DVRS, it's a Motorola product. Those go in the vehicles. Typically, our repeater system in town is up, it's on a tower. And the way it works is the radio signal is sent out to the tower, and then the repeater boosts the signal and sends it back out to all the receiving radios. We have a number of dead spots in our town, primarily in some of our larger commercial buildings. Chatham Bars Inn, for example, and the main inn, almost every residential basement, the schools. If you think of, some of the larger buildings in town, almost everyone has a dead spot, and almost every home has a dead spot in the basement. So the typical repeater system that we operate off of doesn't boost that signal enough to penetrate and send our radio signals out. So when we're working, ambulance calls, it's not typically quite as critical. We have a backup radio system which works on a 400 megahertz as opposed to an 800 megahertz, and that penetrates a little bit more deeply. However, those radios aren't as reliable and safe in building fires. So the repeater systems get installed in the vehicles. We purchased 5 of them. We're actually in the process of installing them right now. There's 2 going in engines, 1 going in the ladder truck, 1 going in my car, and 1 going in the deputy chief's car. And the way they work is it brings that repeater system that would typically be on the tower, and it puts it at the scene. So it makes the communication much more reliable.
Oh, thank you, Chief.
And, a lot of the departments on the Cape, all of our mutual aid partners are all going through similar projects right now. So when we go mutual aid to Harwich or Orleans, or they come here, vice versa, the interoperability is much better.
Interesting, thank you.
Norma, please.
Those buildings that you just spoke about, they do not have those. Why wouldn't a school be required to have those? In some place like CBI that has people come in and they're not in their own homes, why don't they have those as part of their supplies? I mean, I can see you can't have a private home be required to have that, but if you are running an inn or any kind of hostel where you have people who do not belong there, actually, they're just renting a space for the night or something, and a school, why aren't those things required in those buildings?
So typically, this is part of the public safety radio system. So it's not something that a typical homeowner or business owner could go out and purchase on their own. It would have to be procured through public safety agency and installed via certified installer. They can be fairly expensive. In the past, we do have a workaround as to how to communicate. We can turn our radios to a special channel, and then they operate on what we call a direct channel, which basically turns it into a walkie-talkie, which works for on-scene communications. However, we lose some of that communication with folks that might be responding from out of town and aren't within range for that kind of radio-to-radio communication. So our biggest concern with these radios is if a firefighter ever got in trouble on a scene, had to call a mayday and that sort of thing, we wouldn't want them having to change channels in one of those situations. I understand your question. I don't have a good answer as to why they wouldn't want to maybe provide us with funding to supply those on their buildings. But it just hasn't really been a community priority in any communities that I know of.
Do you think it should be?
In a perfect world, the better communication we have, the better our operations will be. I'm just not sure that we'd ever be able to mandate that. Like I said, it's part of the public safety radio system, and it would be really difficult to require that of a business owner.
But if you have 1,200 children in a school, that's a pretty large number of children for whom you have to be prepared to evacuate a building.
Yeah, and just to clarify, like I said, we do have prior to these repeater systems, we did have the ability to have proper on-scene communications. This just makes our firefighters a lot safer by having that dedicated resource on scene that will boost communications and not require them to have to change a channel. But typically in our pre-plans, we know about these buildings in town that have these dead spots, and we, as a matter of practice, switch to that direct channel before we even get on scene.
Thank you.
Barbara, please.
Thank you. Chief, speaking of education, I was thrilled to see that you approached the Cape Tech and got them to offer a firefighting education program. That is wonderful. That's thinking outside the box.
Yeah, it's been going really well. We're about 2/3 the way through the year with them now. It's being offered to high school seniors over at Cape Tech as kind of the pilot version of the program. It was limited to seniors only. The seniors at the tech school, they do roughly 2 weeks on and two weeks off as far as being in the school and then out working in their trade. So we have them in the 2 weeks that they're in their classrooms at the school. So we marketed it as a science program. It's a science elective. So rather than taking a traditional physical science type course, they can do a fire science with us. And we really build it as a way to kind of make it an exploratory program. We looked at some of the recruitment issues that Chief Anderson spoke about with the police, and just we're trying to think outside the box on how to market this to local young adults and try to get them encouraged to enter public safety. So it's been a fun program, and we're looking at expanding it over the years.
Oh, that's great.
So just moving through some of the other grants, our EMPG grant is our Emergency Management Planning Grant. That's an annual grant. It's a less competitive grant. We really just have to apply for it. Municipality our size gets $2,700 a year for that. We use that to supplement kind of some of our personal protective equipment. This year, using it to buy a couple of dry suits for our water rescue team. In years past, speaking to the tactical equipment that Chief Anderson presented, we've used these funds to purchase ballistic gear to put on our ambulances. Similar to the training that they perform, our firefighters perform to go in as part of what we call a rescue task force with law enforcement now. If you look back 10 years ago at some of these active shooter or hostile event situations, it was the fire department practice and the EMS world's practice to kind of stage, wait for law enforcement to clear the scene, make sure things were totally safe before we went in. And we've seen a transition in how we respond to those. We now start going into what we call the warm zone. We don't stage and wait anymore. As soon as law enforcement has somebody going in and going after the perpetrator, we team up with some law enforcement people to offer us protection, and we'll go in and start helping people who are wounded. So a lot of that comes going back to Columbine and some of the lessons learned from those incidences. We don't have the luxury of time when people have been injured in that manner. So we're a lot more proactive about it. And we've trained with our police department. We've trained with our mutual aid partners. We haven't done a large scale drill in a couple of years. We got sidelined a little bit with COVID. But just prior to COVID, we did a drill over at the Harwich Elementary School with Harwich Police and Fire and Chatham Police and Fire to kind of test our response capabilities. So we've used that grant for those types of purchases. The DFS PPE, that's the Department of Fire Services Personal Protective Equipment Grant. This is a 5-year grant program. We've just gotten through year 3. This is a competitive grant process. We've been fortunate. We've gotten approximately $13,000 per year over the last 3 years, and we've utilized most of those funds for the purchase to supplement our turnout gear budget for our structural firefighting gear. Last year in particular, the costs skyrocketed really overnight. So what we asked for, and we'll get into the capital budget momentarily, but what we asked for in the capital budget last year, we expected that to, when we made our request for that, we expected it to supply each member of the department with one set of turnout gear, and it got maybe about half the people one set with the cost going up of the gear. The Comers grant is a radio grant. It's the Commonwealth of Massachusetts Interoperability Radio System. 2 years ago, we got just under $48,000 to replace some of our radios through that state grant. The DFS, Department of Fire Services Safe and Senior Safe grant, is a grant that we get annually. We have to apply for. We've gotten approximately $7,000 each year. That's the grant that we use to go into the school systems to do fire safety education for the kids and to do fire safety and public safety lessons over at the Center for Active Living. And then lastly, a small grant we got a couple years ago was our Office of Public Safety and Security AED grant. We were able to get $2,500 to buy 2 AEDs that one's situated at the Chamber of Commerce building downtown and one's over at the Fish Pier now. So now I'm just going to switch over to the digital budget book and take a look at the proposed operating budget, kind of line by line. So starting off with salaries and wages, you can see that the proposed budget is just over a 3% increase from last fiscal year. And that's primarily due to the cost of living adjustment, the local MRGF, and some of our employees that are still in getting annual step increases. Some of our newer folks and some of our newer officers who get an annual step increase. The temporary wages is $10,000. That's a carryover from years past. We didn't increase that. That's being left in the budget in hopes that some of these students, like that we're looking at from Cape Cod Tech, or some local people that have approached us recently, develop an interest in trying to kind of revitalize our call fire department that we had many years ago. It's difficult to imagine our call department ever getting to a point where they would really ever replace full-time staff or really be a huge supplement to staff. But what we've really missed with the call fire department going away is we've lost that farm system. We've lost the ability to bring people in, train them in-house, vet them as a potential candidate for full-time employment. So we're recruiting pretty heavily. We have a lot of folks that have reached out to us through internship programs in the high school, the Cape Tech program, some students that are recently graduating college that have expressed an interest in public safety. We're hoping to be able to bring them in, get them some training in-house, and so those funds would help offer them some small payments if they were put on the call force. I think the rate is about $20 an hour right now. I'd have to check with Alex. Our training budget sees a 3% increase over last year. That's the contractual increase as folks' overtime rates go up due to the cost of living adjustment. Our total for longevity has actually gone down a little bit. The holiday pay, if you notice a 12% increase there over last year, that was due to the addition of Juneteenth as a holiday. So that was a kind of an unfunded holiday in this year's budget, but that's just to adjust for that. The rest of it's 3% increase in wages. Our educational incentive sees a 16% increase from $33,100 to $38,425. Most of that, I put a couple placeholders in there as we hire new employees. We don't know at what point in the year where they might achieve their associate's degree, which is an $1,800 educational stipend per employee. So if they get that in May, we're then obligated to pay it the following year. So that's mostly what that increase is there, is I just have a couple placeholders in there. We have so many newer employees, we're not sure where they are in their educational process if they get that degree. I want to make sure we have enough to fund it. The EMT and paramedic stipend saw a 2.5% increase. Again, that's mostly due to we've increased the number of paramedics on our staff. So with that, the paramedics get a higher stipend than the EMTs. Our special teams training budget. Our special teams is composed of our water rescue team, members of our technical, regional, countywide technical rescue team. And this past year, we developed a local multi-agency drone team. We have members of the fire department, 5 members of the fire department on that team, 2 members of the police department, and a member of the harbor master department. So that funding is to provide those teams with specialized training. Getting into the expense side of the budget, requesting an additional 3% in our purchase of services expense account, mostly due to an inflationary adjustment. The 40% you see in the total ambulance billing, that's what I was referring to kind of in our introduction there. We have $25,000 in the budget this current fiscal year, and I'm requesting $35,000 for next year, just to account for that increased ambulance revenue. As I explained before, when that revenue goes up, the billing's gonna go up.
Andy, please.
Chief, with regard to that, it used to be that we would adjust the ambulance rate to what was the Medicare maximum. Are we still doing that?
We haven't seen a change in our ambulance fees, I think, since 2014 is what we discussed. And I believe I'd have to double check, but I think right now we're billing below that maximum, or at least right at it.
Okay, because I mean, it seems to me it makes sense to try to at least maintain the Medicare maximum, right, to get some more revenue in. The other side of it is, do you know whether or not we have a bunch of bad debt charge-offs on that? In other words.
Yeah, I'm sorry, could you repeat that again?
If your contractor doing the ambulance billing sends out a bill and cannot collect the amount of money that's due on that, do we charge it off?
Yeah, typically our practice in the past has been we send out 3 bills to each customer. And after that, it's been written off.
Okay, right. I mean, I think in most cases, that would be people who probably cannot afford
Exactly,
to pay it, and they don't have sufficient Medicare coverage,
correct.
or MedX, or whatever the state, does the state healthcare, does that also cover ambulance?
To a certain degree, yeah.
Okay, but
Yeah.
probably not very much.
Yep, yeah. MassCare has, they do supplement some of the ambulance fees for their customers.
All right, thank you.
Barbara, please.
Chief, if it's non-collectible, then I assume Coastal Medical does not get paid either, correct?
That's correct.
Okay, thanks.
Yep, we only get billed on the revenue that they bring in. So jumping down next is our continuing education budget. This was increased by $100 per employee, and that's due to a fee increase that we see from the cost to recertify as an EMT or a paramedic. Our office supplies is a small expense account that went up 3% just for inflationary purposes. Our vehicle and maintenance account went up 5%, both for inflation, cost of parts, and cost of service to our vehicles.
Chief, under the operational supplies, are those ambulance-related supplies, or is that just kit to run the firehouse, or what is under that broadly?
Yep, so the operational supplies is primarily supplies for the ambulance.
Okay.
That's mostly medical-related expenses. And then the vehicle and equipment maintenance account, so equipment, that's not just the vehicle itself, but equipment that's on the engines and ladder truck as well.
And am I correct in recalling that you were mandated by the state or otherwise to kind of refresh certain operational supplies on a stipulated timeframe? And
Yep, almost every piece of medical equipment has an expiration date on it. So unfortunately, there tends to be quite a bit of waste. But that's part of our annual ambulance inspection.
okay, but so that's where that lands, though, in the operational supplies. Okay, thank
Yep.
you.
And, obviously, that's all the medications we carry on the ambulance as well.
Right.
So, some of those fees some of those expenses that you see are offset by the ambulance revenue, even though it doesn't obviously go back into the budget. If we bring a patient and they get delivered a certain number of medications, then the fee for that call goes up.
Understood, okay, thank you. Norman, please.
This probably is on the board, but I can't see it. If a charge is given to someone who uses the ambulance, and they cannot pay that, and they do not have insurance, is there any change in the way they are transported, or does the town pick up that fee?
Similar to the previous question, that the town would end up picking up that fee. So we never want an inability to pay to prohibit somebody from getting the medical care that they need.
I'm sorry if it has been answered before, thank you.
No, it's okay. Uniform budget remains the same. Meeting dues and travel budget remains the same. Capital outlay, I believe Alex is going to decrease that. The total capital outlay was typically for lease payments on vehicles. Our mini pumper has been paid off, so that line item you see will ultimately be decreased. And then just some other smaller accounts are fire prevention and code enforcement. That would be for some incidentals for our fire inspector, for tools and equipment that he might need as part of the inspectional services. And that is it on the fire department side of the budget. If there's any additional questions.
Andy, please.
Chief, this may seem a little out of bounds, but what kind of wildland firefighting capability do we have?
Yeah, so we have a what we call a brush truck. It's not a brush breaker like the ones that you see with the big metal bars in the front that can run trees over. But we have a brush truck that can go out. It's more maneuverable. It can get down into the woods, dirt roads. It has a 400-foot 1-inch hose line on it on a reel that's easier to deploy and can mechanically be reeled back up. And that vehicle can also pump water as it moves. So that's kind of our main brush response vehicle. The mini pumper that was purchased or leased and has now been paid for a few years ago is a little bit of a hybrid. It's kind of an urban interface type vehicle where it's smaller than an engine and is more maneuverable. It can get into some smaller areas such as like some of the cottage colonies in town or some of the smaller roads in town, and doesn't require the same space and maneuverability that a full-size engine or ladder truck would. However, it has the same pump capabilities as a fire engine would.
I mean, the context for my question is that particularly with the tornado a couple of years ago, there's some parts of town that look like they have a tremendous fire burden. And, you know, how well are we able to keep up with either thinning it out or interfacing with the state to thin it out or AmeriCorps or somebody else?
That's a good question. We work very well with DCR, Department of Conservation and Recreation. Josh Nigro is our regional fire warden. We interact with him on a monthly basis at our regional chiefs meetings. They have additional staff that they put on for their agency during kind of the prime brush fire season.
Right.
They're a resource to us. Anytime that we have kind of a brush fire that's beyond just like somebody's backyard fire that got a little bit out of control, we can call them. They come in on a mutual aid basis and come and will support our operations. They'll also allow us to clear the scene as they kind of maintain a fire watch. Some of the other capabilities they had, the Goose Pond area, for example, after the tornado, saw a lot of down trees, a lot of limbs down. We were down there the fall after the tornado, I want to say. There's some electrical services that run through the woods there. And one of those wires broke free. It was arcing and caused a brush fire. While we were out there, we noticed, how much damage there was. And, as those trees lay on the ground, they start to dry out over time. We had Josh and DCR come in and do an assessment and did some cleanup of some of those downed trees and limbs that were remaining from that.
Okay, because I mean, really the direction I was going was the preventative services.
Yeah.
Right, to be able to do that.
So, DCR does offer some of those preventative, and we do work with him on identifying some of those areas of town that need some cleanup.
Okay, particularly off of Broken Back Hill Road, which is right in that area. That was a tremendous amount of knockdown.
Yeah, so I was referring to the kind of the deeper inside of Broken Back. So I know they were up there a couple years ago, but we welcome anytime somebody comes across an area that they think is particularly vulnerable. Let us know, and we'll get in there and do an assessment with DCR.
Right, thank you.
Okay, other questions for the chief? So Chief, I've got, I guess, the same two questions I had for Chief Anderson, which is kind of the implications on the department and its operations, morale, et cetera, of our extraordinarily constrained housing market locally.
Yeah, it's certainly a huge challenge, a huge issue for us. Our old model of staffing the station when the ambulance went out of town, if they left with 3, we would backfill the station on overtime with 3. The housing situation isn't one in which that it's just become too expensive to live here. It's also obviously, as you folks all know, an inventory problem and a rental availability problem. So it's not just that it's too expensive, there's just not any availability. So we've opened up our residency requirements in our contract to allow our employees to live further away than we used to require them. The double-edged sword of that is as they live farther away, they're less available to come in on an emergency callback situation. So in order to kind of overcome that, we've put a person on per shift, so we're now at 7 per shift. But we also don't drop our minimum as low as we used to. So in the off-season, when we were at 6 per shift, we would drop down to 5 people in the off-season. So if somebody was on vacation, if one person was off, we wouldn't fill that. Now that we're at 7, we're still just dropping 1 person, so we still maintain 6 people. And we start the shift at 6 in the off-season so that we know that we have enough staff to at least staff 2 calls if we have 2 calls simultaneously. So, the housing's, it's certainly an impact on operations. Another concern is as folks, like Chief Anderson said, as they live farther and farther away, we worry about them after a 24-hour shift, if it's a particularly long shift, having to commute a significant travel distance home when they're tired. So it's certainly way up high on our priority list to try to find solutions to that.
Okay, that's helpful, thank you. And in the context of that, how concerned are you relative to retention and kind of wage disparity between CFD and other departments nearby?
Yeah, so, I think if you look at our comparables in our neighboring towns, we're probably fairly similar. There are the fire districts on the Cape, up in Barnstable. The town of Barnstable is broken up into several villages, and they each have their own fire district, their own water district. Their funding mechanism is much different than a regular town. Their contracts, because of that, tend to be, some of the best in the state. It's a very challenging environment right now. Every department's looking for help. Due to the variety of reasons that I mentioned before for some of the gaps in training locally, due to COVID, the closure of the fire academy, there's not as many people in the workforce, which has made it so employees can kind of shop around as to where they want to work. So it's kind of pitted a lot of the departments against each other and trying to recruit people. As I mentioned before, we've been very successful in being patient and recruiting really good people onto our department, but it's certainly a huge challenge. As far as the specifics to your question, Mr. Chair, I think, we do compare reasonably well with the immediately surrounding departments. But when you get to kind of those giants up in the Barnstable area, it's tough to compete with them.
Okay, that's helpful, thank you. Okay, further questions for the chief?
I'm not going anywhere yet. I got to go through emergency
You
management
got
now.
emergency, exactly. We got 12 minutes just for the,
All right.
11 minutes just for the
This
note
should be
takers.
quick. The emergency management budget request is level funded request from FY '23. The operating supplies account make up for a majority of the expense side of the budget. These funds are utilized for a variety of operational expenditures throughout the year and will also be utilized to support the BOX CERT, which is Brewster, Orleans, Chatham, and Harwich Community Emergency Response Team. The CERT team is a volunteer organization which has been largely grant funded. Members have incurred out-of-pocket expenses since the team's inception, and each municipality has been asked to allocate $2,500 annually to support that team. So just So as I mentioned, salary and wages are level funded here. And all the expenses are level funded. Based on historical expenditures on the operational supplies part of the budget, that $2,500 request from Box CERT, I plan to absorb into that expense account. Any questions on emergency management?
Andy, please.
I assume, Chief, the total wages in this are essentially extra being paid to otherwise employed police officers or firefighters?
No, the total temporary wages in the budget here is to pay our emergency manager, John Kondratowicz,
Okay.
who's a part-time stipended employee. And then there's also a small amount of that, which last year was the first year we funded a paid internship in the summer months. We were able to bring a student in from Mass Maritime Academy. I think it was about $3,600 for the months of July and August.
Thank you.
And that's it for emergency management. I do need to quickly go back and just run you through our capital requests for both
please.
fire and police, fire and emergency management, excuse me. So I mentioned before, firefighter protective clothing, requesting $75,000 as we did last year. That's to continue to purchase low PFAS firefighting gear for all of our employees. And also maintain the additional $20,000 that is a recurring request for that budget. And that additional $20,000 would be for emergency replacement of gear, repairs on gear, and that sort of expense. The self-contained breathing apparatus, this is a recurring request of $10,000 per year, same as in years past. Same as the radios, for radio replacements as they come forward, same request as last year, $10,000. The ambulance replacement, we've typically, every other year in our capital request have replaced an ambulance. That cost is, the $355,000 request is based on a current quote from our vendor on that. They've seen an incredible increase in the price. So that's what that request is. The administrative and command vehicle, $65,000 to replace a Chevy Tahoe, which is a 2013 vehicle currently being used by the inspector with just over 70,000 miles on it. These vehicles, once they're ordered, can take anywhere from 8 to 16 months to get. So by the time we, if we're successful in being granted that funding, by the time that vehicle's set for replacement, it's going to be over 11 years old with over 80,000 miles on it.
Mr. Chair,
I'm sorry, Joanne, please.
Chief, can you explain PFAS equipment?
The low PFAS, so
Yes.
we're all kind of aware of PFAS and how it relates to our drinking water, et cetera. Some of our turnout gear also has low levels of PFAS in it. Our older issue of gear has higher levels. Some of the technology and the materials that they're using for our equipment now offers lower levels than our previous issue. So certainly from a cancer prevention standpoint, we want to try to decrease the exposure as much as we can to our firefighters.
And your emergency management generators, where are they located?
So the emergency management generator account, so that capital request of $100,000 is would be on the emergency management side. Currently, there remains just under, I believe, $200,000 in that account. Some of that money is carried over from FY22 to replace put a permanent generator in at the community center. That project is underway. We hope that they break ground this spring on that. As with everything in the world, it just takes time to get equipment and parts. But the contract's already been signed for that, and that project's underway. We're also working on a project at the fire station to install quick connects for the portable generator that we have currently providing emergency power backup at the community center. So if you folks can remember the storm we had last year, it knocked out a number of generators in town,
Yeah.
the fire department being one of them. So that would create some redundancies in our critical infrastructure. Once the permanent generator is installed at the community center, the portable generator that's there now would then be able to be a backup at multiple other buildings in town. So the lugs that they put at the fire station would allow that portable generator to be hooked up at the fire station.
Okay,
And then the additional capital request would be then, that portable generator is getting quite old. I believe it's over 25 years old now. So it would be to purchase for the town a new portable generator going forward.
okay, thank you.
Yep.
Okay, further questions for the chief? All right, chief, thank you very much.
All right, thank you,
We
folks.
appreciate your time, your presentation. Well done. I believe the town manager would like to say something. Welcome, Jill.
Thank you. We have Chief Anderson who came back. If you want a presentation on the animal control budget, that's under the police department.
Sure, we've got a couple of minutes.
Okay.
And then when Chief is done, we have a couple of housekeeping matters that we need to talk about, so if people are good with hanging out for another couple of minutes afterwards, or extending the runtime of the meeting for a couple of minutes, that would be appreciated by the chair. Chief, wild animals.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Very slight increase in the budget for the Animal Control Department. The increase is due to her salary. And line 13 and line 14, both of those are line items at $500 for purchase of service and operational supplies. I think the latest draft, we're looking to increase both of those 500s to 1,000, and that is strictly because of the cost of doing business. Her operational supplies could be food for the animals, blankets for the animals, cleaning supplies, and we would appreciate your support with that. And lastly, I have the answer to your question, Mr. Chair. You asked what the other 5,200 in training was
Yeah.
from the other budget.
Yeah.
The answer is, when the old reserve officer system was in place, we used to train them at the beginning of each season. We use that money now to supplement our current reserves. We have just one at this point, and that money, we have to send that officer to a special in-service program. So that is it is a separate training budget item. That's what that is. And since we only have one reserve officer,
Yeah.
that was what I was referring to when I said if that community service officer program, we were able to implement that early, that would be a funding source to get that up and running with supplies before July 1st.
Okay, that's very helpful. I appreciate that.
Okay, thank you.
Chief. All right, any questions on animal control? 740 odd calls. All right, thank you. Appreciate you coming back on that. Okay, so therein lies the proposed FY24 budget for public safety. Couple of housekeeping things. We are going to be doing principal projects and operations on Thursday. I guess Terry Whalen's going to be joining us and walking us through his universe. We have a report that's due to the select board 1 week from today. And I have gotten input from some of you. I would cheerfully request more input from anybody. The feedback that I am getting so far is that this is a sound budget, a fairly conservative budget, predicated largely on kind of growth and inflation and the like. I've had some concern expressed, which mirrors my own, regarding the Chamber of Commerce request. There are quite a few staffing proposals, of course, embedded in the budget, which you've had some feedback on. Generally, I think well received, but again, I welcome any input that folks have. We have been asked by the select board to weigh in on the proposed change to the financial policies around free cash spending, which I think I can present on Thursday. If not, we'll do it next week. So we can provide them some feedback to that. I just want to make sure that I have the language correct. And then I would strongly encourage those who have not yet, if you guys haven't had the chance to look at the select board meeting from last Thursday, I would strongly encourage those to do it. It was a 90-minute conversation around capital projects and capital spending, of which we are on a standalone basis outside of the capital spending in the budget. But we're kind of in the neighborhood of $45 million on a variety of projects. $20 million for a wastewater treatment facility, $2 million at the Eldridge Public Library, Council on Aging building that's currently being carried at the two-year-old figure of $8.9 million. Salt shed, which when we first started talking about that a couple years ago, $600,000, is now anywhere between 1.2 and 1.8. Transfer station costs approaching $5 million in the high case scenario. So I would strongly encourage, given the magnitude of these numbers, it's hard to argue against, I think, against any of these projects in particular, but it's an extraordinary amount of money that we're contemplating committing to. Hopefully we'll be benefiting from zero or low-cost financing provided by the state in some cases, but I would encourage everybody to have a look at that meeting. It's highly instructional and informative. Joanne, please.
Mr. Chair, are we going to try as a committee to prioritize from our point of view?
I think that's certainly something we can do. I don't know, the town manager may want to weigh in this, but these are, I'm not sure how much optionality there is in a lot of these things. There are pieces of equipment that, the belt filter press that needs to be replaced in order to, continue the optimized operations at the wastewater treatment facility. You have to dewater the sludge, and the equipment we have now is aging and failing, and it's $6 million to get a new one.
And each one of these will have its separate, its own article?
I think in principle, yes, but I'll defer to the town manager, who's the chief strategist and not me.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yes, so the Select Board received the presentation by either staff or our consultants last Thursday, which was February 9th. They received the information, and then we hope to have an agenda item, I believe, on February 28th for them to review the materials, the costs, the financial plan, how we would pay for each of them. And those are separate articles that would be voted at town meeting. So there's about 3.6 in the capital article for FY '24, and that's covered by free cash and other available funds. And then these certain projects will be voted as separate articles, possibly ballot questions. And we have a little bit more time with that because we anticipate closing of the town meeting warrant on or about March 14th. So February 28th will be a key meeting for us, and then the next couple of meetings afterwards. Thank you.
Thank you.
Norma, please.
Based on the figures that you've been giving us, including the recent ones, what is the percentage overage since last year? What is the total percent if we went with everything that was asked?
Overage in what sense, compared to last year's kind of
Yes.
fully funded and approved budget? Well, it's harder to draw direct comparisons, of course, because last year, unlike the previous year, we didn't have any significant debt authorizations. So 2 years ago, you may recall, we had $30 million, roughly 28 million, I think, if memory serves, in debt authorizations for the wastewater treatment facility. We didn't have any of that last year. But the total nut for last year's kind of town meeting approved spend was $55 or $6 million. And if broadly, the operating budget plus the educational budget plus the internal capital budget plus the water budget, et cetera, comes out again to roughly that figure, $55, $56, $57 million. We're looking at $40+ million on top of that. So 90 to $100 million for spending authorizations at town meeting, roughly.
Trips off your tongue just like $1.98, doesn't it?
Sure does.
I think the town needs to discuss and really understand, the term free cash. I don't think there is such a thing.
Well, we know
You
that.
have to pay for it somewhere, and I think that is very confusing to a lot of persons who are attending there. They see free cash, oh, well, we can do whatever we want to with it, and that just doesn't cut it.
Well, we can certainly emphasize that in our report to the warrant, just to remind people that actually what free cash is really kind of a zero-interest loan from the taxpayer to the municipal government.
Thank you.
All right, thank you. Anybody else? Barbara, please.
Sounds like it could be a two-night meeting, so good that we're buying those electric clickers, those electronic voting clickers, instead of leasing them.
Well, exactly. Well, we'll see if, hopefully I guess the select board's authorized that, so hopefully the town will purchase said clickers and we can work our way expeditiously through the meeting.
Oh,
So-
Mr. Chairman, speaking of that, I've had people question me about the electronic system.
Start over again, please.
Mr. Chairman, I've had people question me about this new electronic voting system at town meeting, and I'm understanding that this does not need to go to town meeting, this expenditure of around $26,000, that if we approve it, or is it just the select board who has to approve it in order to spend the ARPA money?
It does not. I mean, the town manager's approaching the mic, so I'll shut up.
At the recommendation of the FinCom Subcommittee for the purchase of it, the Select Board approved the use of ARPA funds. So it's our current year funds that we could use to purchase them before this 2023 town meeting.
Okay, thank you.
So with the fairy tale ending being that hopefully we have it deployable for this year's town meeting.
Okay.
I know that's the hope of the moderator. Just, again, a footnote in thinking about the report to the select board, the other item that has come up is the prospective request for a surf boat for operation by the town of Chatham. So I think we're probably going to have something to say. I've heard from several people on that topic. So that's kind of what we got. Again, the report is due next Tuesday, which means I need to start writing probably about 6 o'clock today. So for those of you who have been judiciously holding out your comments, let's get it moving so we can talk a little bit about it on Tuesday. And because I'm going to be sitting here next Tuesday night going through this with these ladies and gentlemen. So Barbara, please.
So really, that's how you're spending Valentine's Day?
Yeah. Yeah, that's what I'll do for this committee. All right. Anything else from anybody? If not, I'll take a motion to adjourn. And a second.
Second.
Okay, and roll call vote. Norma? Barbara?
Aye.
John Papalo? John?
Aye.
Joanne?
Aye.
Andy?
Aye.
Kristen?
Aye.
Tracy?
Aye.
And the chair says adjourn. All right, happy Valentine's Day, everybody.